We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Dalet Amud Beis Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 64b. The Gemara here continues the statement from Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says if you had a carbon Pesach and you lost it, so you designated another animal instead and then you found the first one, so the mitzvah is to bring the first one as the carbon Pesach. However, Vimhoya Hasheni Muvchar Mimenu. Rabbi Yossi says if the second animal is better than the first, Yevienu, then you should just bring the second animal. And again, the point of bringing Rabbi Yossi is that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvah is Barish. And the Gemara continues now, returning to the issue of the Seirim on Yom Kippur. Amar Rava says, Deiko Masnisin Kivase de Rav, Ubraisa Kivase de Rabbi Yochanan. Our Mishnah is Meduyak like Rav, and the Braisa supports Rabbi Yochanan. Again, Rav is the one that holds if you have the goat that remains alive from the first pair, and then you have the goat from the second pair, according to Rav, you should take from the first pair, because like Rabbi Yossi says, mitzvah barishon, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the one in the first pair was already pushed off. Once it's pushed off, you can't return it, you can't use it again. Instead, you should take only from the second pair. And now the Gemara explains. Masnisin kavase de Rav. The Mishnah supports Rav, the Katani, because the Mishnah says as follows. Im shel shem mace. Let's say in the first pair, the one that was LaHashem was the one that died. So Zesha Allah Olav Hagorel Lashem Yiskayim Tachtov. So the one that you take from the second pair that the lottery says is LaHashem, that should be instead of the first one. V'idach Kidakoi Koi, and the other one should stay as it is. And Rashi over here says Kidakoi Koi Bikdusha, meaning it stays in its kedusha. V'lo Amrina Nircha. We don't push off that one that's still alive from the first pair. In other words, the mashmos of the Mishnah is that the one that's still alive from the first pair, that's the one that you use la'azazel, and then the second pair, the one that's LaHashem, replaces the one that died in the first pair that was LaHashem. And then the Gemara continues, Braisa kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. The Braisa supports Rabbi Yochanan. The Katani, because what does the Braisa say? It says as follows. Sheni, when it says we take the second one, Eini Yodea im Sheni shebezug rishon, do we mean the second one of the first pair? Im Sheni shebezug Sheni, or do we mean the second one of the second pair? Keshuomer Yomar Chai, when it says it remains alive, velo shechavero meis, it means we're taking the one that is a pair, that both are alive from the pair, meaning the second pair. You don't take the one that's alive, that its friend, that its companion died, meaning that first pair where one of them died and one of them remains alive, you don't take from there. And Rashi over here says, Sheni Eini Yodea Amasnisin Koi. This is going on the Mishnah. Sheni Shashoninu Olav Yira Eini Yodea. I don't know what we're talking about. And the Brisa says, Velo Shechavero Meis, Velo Zeh Shemeis Chavero. You don't take from the first pair where the counterpart died. And the Gemara now asks, My mashma, how do you get this from the pasuk? Where do we see from the words Yomar Chai that you should take from the second pair and not the first? And the Gemara explains, Yomar Chai velo shekvar amad. It remains alive, not that it was already omed, as Rashi over here says. Yomar Chai velo shekvar amad v'nidcha. Not the one that was set to be the carbon and was pushed off. Al yedei misas chaver, because its counterpart died. V'achshav hu bo lachzor v'lamod. And now you want to remake it into the one that's bringing a carbon. That's not the one you should use. Yomar Chai amida achas, meaning Yomar Chai means it should be continual. Take the one that was never pushed off, velo shtei amidos, not the one that was ready to be a carbon, then is suddenly not ready to be a carbon, and now you want to again make it into a carbon. That first pair, that's not the one you should take. And the Gemara continues and tries to bring a proof to this machlokas Amoraim Rav and Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, V'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah finishes that furthermore Rabbi Yehuda says, Nishbach Adam, let's say the blood spills out. This means the blood spills out of the animal, of the Sa'ir that was LaHashem. So then Yomus HaMishtaleach, then the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach has to be left to die. Meis HaMishtaleach, and same the other way around. If the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach dies, Yishafech Adam, you have to pour out the blood. You can't use the blood from the counterpart, from the Sa'ir that was LaHashem. And so the Gemara says, B'shlomo Rabbi Yochanan. This part of the Mishnah makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. D'yomar ba'alei chayim nidach. And Rabbi Yochanan's shita is that living animals can be pushed off. In other words, once it's pushed off from being a carbon, it can't come back and become a carbon. Mishum ha'achi yomus ha'mishtaleach. So it makes sense if the blood spills out of the one that's LaHashem. So then you have a situation where you have to let the sir ha'mishtaleach die. It's nidachin. It's pushed off. Ela l'Rav d'Omar Balei Chayim eino nidachin. But according to Rav, who says living animals are not pushed off, Ama Yomus HaMishtaleach. Why should it be that you allow this living animal, the Sir HaMishtaleach, that you have to let it die and you can't use it? Why is that the case? And so the Gemara answers, Amar loch Rav, Rav will respond to you, Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda lo kamina. I was never saying my shita according to Rabbi Yehuda. You're correct. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Baalei Chaim arni dachin. Ki amino aliba de Rabbanan. I was only speaking according to the Rabbanan. Rashi over here explains, Yomos hamishtaleach alma Baalei Chaim nidachin. It seems clear from Rabbi Yehuda, if the seir hamishtaleach is being left to die, you see Baalei Chaim are pushed off. And so the Gemara says, Rav will say, Ki ka'amar aliba de Rabbanan. I was speaking according to the Rabbanan, meaning, Mida ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda vi'od. Rabbi Yehuda here says, vi'od amar Rabbi Yehuda. Furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda says, la'ashme'inan de Baalei Chaim nidachin. What Rabbi Yehuda is teaching you is, he's arguing really on two counts. He's additionally telling you that Baalei Chaim can be pushed off. Mechlal de shamino l'Rabbanan de amri sheni shebezug rishon karav de Baalei Chaim ein nidachin. And that implies that on the contrary, the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Yehuda on this point, and the Rabbanan say the first pair, that animal that remained alive in the first pair, could be a carbon because Baalei Chaim are not pushed off. V'sheni shebezug sheni gira, and it's the second one in the second pair that you should allow it to graze. She'ein chatos tzibor mesa, because the Rabbanan also disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. They say that a public carbon chatos is not killed; it's not left to die. You let it graze till it develops some mum, and then you sell it. V'yasa lefluge olayu betarti, and there's a machlokas in two separate points over here in the Mishnah. Dekam riso ein chatos tzibor mesa. Rabbi Yehuda says to the Rabbanan, that which you say a public carbon chatos does not die, ani omer tamas. I say it does die. V'yod lo bazeh sho'amarta mola v'yira ani omer yomas. And furthermore, on the ones that you say, the one that you say to graze, that's not the one that I say should die. Elahu yikrav, I say that's the one that should be brought. V'sheni shebezug rishon yomas. Rabbi Yehuda says that I hold it's the second one of the first pair that dies, because again, Rabbi Yehuda is telling the Rabbanan, I hold Baalei Chaim arni dachin, and therefore it's the one that's alive of the first pair that should die. When you're saying, you the Rabbanan are saying, that it's from the second pair, and according to the Rabbanan it doesn't die, but it's just left to graze. So that's how Rav understands the Mishnah. There's a machlokas on two issues over here between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Number one, does the chatos tzibor, should it die? And number two, do we say Baalei Chaim arni dachin or not? And so the Gemara now continues and says, Bishalom l'Rav. Well, this makes sense on the contrary now. This makes sense according to Rav. B'ha pligi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. Now we understand that this is the issue that Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan are arguing about. Elul Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, b'mai pligi. What exactly are they arguing about? Rashi over here says, Bishalom l'Rav b'ha pligi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan b'hai v'od deseifa, meaning v'od is a further argument. There's an additional argument about Baalei Chaim nidachin. Elul Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Rabbanan nami b'sheni shebezug rishon amru yira. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that according to the Rabbanan, when it comes to the second animal in the first pair, that we're talking about the second animal in the first pair that grazes. In other words, they both agree it's the one in the first pair. So by my polig Rabbi Yehuda layu b'hach seifa de katani v'yod. Why is Rabbi Yehuda saying v'od? There's just really one machlokas over here regarding whether it dies or whether it's yira, but there's no machlokas about which animal, meaning which animal, whether it's in the first pair or the second pair. So what's going on according to Rabbi Yochanan? And the Gemara responds to that. The Gemara says, Amar Rava says, no, we already said that the Mishnah really is meduyik, more like Rav. In other words, you're right. According to Rav, it is easier to read the Mishnah. The Mishnah supports Rav, as we said, and it's the Brisa which supports Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara continues and tries another proof from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, she'ein chatos tzibor mesa. Again, according to the Rabbanan in the Mishnah, the chatos that's a public carbon chatos does not die, rather it is left to graze. So the Gemara now makes a diak, hadi yachid, but if you had the exact same case, but it would be an individual carbon chatos, ki gavna mesa, so in such a scenario it would die. And the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan. That works according to Rabbi Yochanan, Kid Rabbi Abba Amar Rav, because it will follow what Rabbi Abba says in the name of Rav. Diyamar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav, because Rabbi Abba says in the name of Rav, and Rashi will explain right over here exactly what we mean. Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Yira de Masnisan Asheni Shebezug Rishon Ka'amar. Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that which animal grazes according to the Tanakama, according to the Rabbanan, it is the animal that remains alive in the first pair. So therefore, mashkachas law, then it all makes sense. The ilu diyachid, because if that animal was not a carbon sibor, but a carbon yachid, the one in the first pair, ki agav natamas, it actually would die, misham chatas shekipru ba'aleh, because it would be a halacha of a carbon chatas where the bailim have already gotten a kapara with the other animal, meaning the second animal. And the halacha is, if you get a kapara with the second animal, the first animal then does die, kid Rabbi Abba, and that follows what Rabbi Abba says. The Yoma Mesechet Yoma, because Rabbi Abba says in Meseches Yoma as follows: Gabe plugsa de Rebbe v'Rabbanan. There's a machlokus over there, Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Shenechliku b'mafresh chataso v'nevda. They're arguing in the following case: a person separates his carbon chatas, it gets lost. V'hifresh acheres tachteh. So then he goes and he separates a second one in its place. V'nimtzas harishon, and then you find the first one. V'areishtein omdos, and now they're both in front of him. To come a Rebbe mischaper ba'achas mehen. So Rebbe over there says you use one of them as a kapara, v'ashniya Thomas, and the second one has to die. The Chachamim say ein chatos shekipru ba'aleh mesa. They say that if you have a carbon chatos where the bailim already got a kapara, it doesn't die. Elo shenimtzis la'achar shekipru habailim, unless it was found after the kapara, the bailim already got the kapara. Avol nimtza kodem kapara, but if a situation was you found it before the kapara, well achar hafrasha, but after already you separated that replacement animal, then already roa, then you leave it to graze. And the key here is what Rabbi Abba is about to say. V'yomer Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba says, on that machlokus Rebbe and the Chachamim, hakol modem, that everybody agrees, shem nischaper b'she'eno avuda dahainu shniya, that if the bailim get a kapara with the second animal, the one that wasn't lost, the replacement animal, shehufresh achron, the one that was separated last, avuda mesa, everyone agrees that first animal which got lost, that for sure dies. Shekach nemra halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai, chatos she'avda v'nischapru ba'aleh ba'acheres harishona mesa. If you have a chatos that gets lost and the bailim use a second animal instead, the first one dies. That's why it makes perfect sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, in our case, in our Mishnah, which animal are you using? So again, the sheni shebezug rishon, the second one in the first pair, that's the one that is left to die, in theory, if it would have been a chatas of an individual, because you're using, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you're using the animal in the second pair. The first pair was Baalei Chaim Nidachin. The first pair already got pushed off, so it makes perfect sense. The animal in the first pair is left to graze because it's a public carbon chatas, but if it would be an individual, it would die, as Rabbi Abba says. Everybody agrees if the second animal is the one you get the kapara from, the first animal dies. And then Rabbi Abba continues, Lo nechliku elish and eschaper barishona v'hashniya omedes. The whole machlokus over here between Rebbe and the Rabbanan about whether it should die or not, between Rebbe and the Chachamim, that's only in a situation where you use the first animal as your kapara, as your atonement, and the second one is standing in front of us. Uvaha pligi, and the machlokus is as follows: Rebbe Sava, Rebbe holds mafresh letzorech tashlume avud ka'avud dami. Rebbe holds if you separate an animal in order to make up for one that got lost, that's like the lost animal. Rabbanan Savri Lav Ka'avud Dami. The Rabbanan say, no, that's not the same as the lost animal. Meaning, do you treat the second animal like the first animal? If you were to choose, if the Bailim were to choose to bring the first animal as the kapara, so do you let the second animal die, just like if it would be the reverse, where you would let the first animal die? That's actually the machlokes, Rebbe and the Rabbanan. And Rashi finishes off, Agavi Masnisin Dahacha. Now going to our Mishnah over here, Bishlom el Rabbi Yochanan. It all makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, to Amar Sheni Shebezug Rishon Katani Masnisin Yira, where he says that the Mishnah means to say it's the one in the first pair, that first animal, the remaining animal alive in the first pair that grazes. Hainu do you have time? Misham de'in chatos sibur mesa. That's why the Mishnah says, you know why it grazes and it doesn't die? Because a public carbon chatos doesn't die. Hadiyachid Thomas, but if it would be an individual chatos, if it would be a chatos that wasn't public, so then it would die. The havale nischaper b'she'eno avuda, because that would be a situation where you got the kapar from the one that was not lost, meaning from the second animal. V'hadechuya kayamis, and that first animal that was pushed off, that remains alive. V'hakol modim shemesa, like Rabbi Abba says, everybody agrees that in that situation, that animal in the first pair should certainly die in such a case if it was a private carbon chatos, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Hey Amud Aleph.